Indigenous Australians were forced to parade alongside animals in what were known as human zoos. Human zoos were a disturbing phenomenon that occurred in Australia and around the world during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Indigenous people were often put on display like animals. These exhibits were presented as educational opportunities, but were really just deeply dehumanizing and exploitative. In this video, we will explore the shocking history of human zoos in Australia and the lasting impact they had on Indigenous communities. Human zoos were a form of entertainment that emerged in Europe and the Americas during the 19th century. Zoos have long been used to display animals as objects of curiosity and study, but human zoos were a different beast entirely. Human zoos functioned as exhibitions displaying people of different ethnicities, cultures, and races as objects of curiosity and entertainment. In many cases, human zoos were created by a colonial power to display people of the colonized country as primitive, exotic attractions. Human zoos were also used to celebrate the supposed superior European culture by comparing it with the supposedly inferior natives. The dark history of human zoos in Australia is deeply entrenched in the country's colonial past. Initially, Aboriginal, Pacific Islanders, and Chinese immigrants were all targeted. All three groups were put on display as primitive, exotic attractions in human zoos that were meant to highlight the supposed superiority of the white race. These exhibits were part of a larger history of exploitation and mistreatment of Indigenous people around the world, and they were often used to support racist and inaccurate ideas about human evolution. Aboriginal people have been present in Australia for over 50,000 years. However, the British colonists who arrived in the 18th century had no interest in learning about their culture or respecting their customs. Rather than acknowledging Aboriginal people as human beings with valid customs and practices, the British colonists saw them as inferior beings who were fit for exploitation. They were often put in conditions that were not suitable for human habitation, such as small enclosed spaces or cages, where they were often required to perform cultural activities or rituals as a form of entertainment. They were often then subjected to physical abuse and mistreatment from the colonists, who ensured that their rights were no longer existent. The practice of exhibiting Indigenous peoples in human zoos was a deeply horrific and degrading form of exploitation that reflects the racism and prejudice that was prevalent in society at the time. The impact of human zoos didn't stop at the Aboriginal people. Their impact on Pacific Islanders and Chinese immigrants was also deeply damaging. Pacific Islanders who had been recruited as labourers by the British were often viewed by colonists as primitive and savage due to their lack of formal education. These Pacific Islanders were put on display in zoos alongside Aboriginal people. They were often forced to perform in mock battles or tribal dances for the entertainment of the white majority. These exhibitions perpetuated harmful stereotypes and dehumanized Pacific Islanders, portraying them as exotic and inferior. Chinese immigrants who had begun arriving in Australia in large numbers during the gold rush of the 1850s were also subjected to dehumanizing treatment in human zoos. They were often depicted as being dirty, disease-ridden, and untrustworthy, and were exhibited alongside freak show attractions like bearded ladies and conjoined twins. These exhibitions further perpetuated negative stereotypes about Chinese immigrants and contributed to the discrimination and racism they faced, which has continued to this day. The human zoos in Australia were a form of cultural imperialism that sought to celebrate the superiority of the white race. However, they actually did the opposite by perpetuating racist stereotypes and highlighting the injustice of colonialism. The harm inflicted on the individuals who were exhibited in human zoos was not limited to the degradation and objectification they experienced while being displayed. Many of the individuals who were exhibited in these zoos were taken from their homes and families and were forced to live in inhumane conditions while they were being displayed for the entertainment of colonists. They were often poorly treated and were not given proper food, shelter, or medical care. These exhibitions also played a role in perpetuating harmful and racist beliefs about the people who were displayed in them. By presenting people from marginalised communities as exotic or inferior, human zoos helped to justify the colonizers' actions and to reinforce the belief in the superiority of the white European culture. Human zoos were largely abandoned by the end of the 19th century. This was mostly due to a growing awareness of the injustices they represented. The end of human zoos did not, however, mark the end of racism, prejudice, or a desire to profit off the bodies of disadvantaged groups. As society became more sensitive to racism, people began to see the benefit of removing offensive and exploitative imagery from the public sphere. This led to a gradual phasing out of the racist imagery and a greater focus on promoting equality. Human zoos remain an important reminder of the need to remain vigilant against racism and social justice issues. Only by acknowledging and addressing the injustices of the past can we hope to create a more inclusive and equitable society in the future.